Joseph Walter Jackson was born on July 26, 1928 in Arkansas. He came to be known worldwide as the patriarch of probably the first musical family, the Jacksons. Yes, that's when he became world famous for being the father of the world famous musically talented Jackson family. Joe and his wife Catherine went on to have 10 children in total. Well, I know it's reported that it's only 9. They only had 9 children, but they actually had 10 children. Brother Marlon actually had a twin brother named Brandon who died at birth, unfortunately. So, so they actually had 10 children, but yeah, with the unfortunate event that happened to Brandon, that would have been Marlon's twin brother, death at birth, they ended up with 9. I also want to say in this picture, in this photo here, you might just see Joe, his wife Catherine, and 8 of their children. Reby is missing out of this picture for some reason. And unfortunately, I apologize for that, but Reby is missing out of this picture. So you might only see 8 children, and you might only count 8. But Reby, the oldest sister, the oldest child, is not in this photo. Joe and Catherine raised all 9 of their children in the small, modest house in Gary, Indiana. So it was a total of 11 of them that cohabitated in this small, modest home here in Gary, Indiana. Joe was a tough provider, head of the family type of man that he really provided for his family. He provided for his large family in any way he could. He out there struggling. He had a lot of dreams. He worked to provide for his family as well as pursuing some of his dreams. He pursued his dreams as a boxer. He had a brief career as a boxer, and he also played in a couple of blues bands as well. But neither one of them reached the success that he hoped for. But all the while, he worked at the steel mill, for long hours to provide for his family. He was a real man. He provided for his family. He took the struggle. He could have ran like many men have over years and left and departed or left their family and did this and just been cowards and just chickened out. But Joe stood there and he provided for his family. Most certainly he did that, and that's something no one can take away from him. They always want to attack Joe Jackson and say he was this and that, he was a monster and label him a monster, but he was a strong family man that took care of his family, no matter what his flaws or he had. We all as humans have flaws, so hey. But one thing that he did, he took care of his family. He was definitely a family man. In 1962, after catching Tito playing with his guitar, which Joe was initially, he was really upset about with Tito messing with his guitar. He discovered that Tito had a little skill as far as playing the guitar, and Joe came up, being the ambitious person that he was, he came up with the idea of, hey, let me form a group or something, and that propelled the idea of creating a music group with his sons. From that brainstorm came from Joe himself. He seen the chance of his sons becoming superstars right at that moment. So Joe took his 5 oldest sons and he worked them hard and had them perform and get their performance down and get their act tight. They're singing and dancing, and he really was a strict on them of getting every move down packed to the letter. He basically molded superstars. He molded performers that he wanted to see. He molded performers that were gonna be great. He instilled that in them, greatness in them. He instilled it in them. Don't take nothing less but greatness. We may have a problem with the techniques that he used, but he was the mastermind of the Jackson 5. You can say whatever you want to about the man, but he instilled that greatness in all of them, including Michael. He was the brain power. He was the driving force. And he worked them. He did a lot of things. Like I said, you may not be a fan of the way that he went about it, but man, it produced great results, as we know. But yes, he really cracked the whip on them as far as performing. He drug it out of them. He brung it out of them, and he brought them to the forefront and made it happen for them. I mean, he took them all around locally, took them to the bars to perform, to hone their craft. He did all talent shows that they can enter, and he really was there, pushing it. And it probably been part of his own ambition as well, because he had he wanted to have a music career as well for himself personally when he was in his blues band. So it might have been some of that was driving Joe as well. He wanted to, win almost through his sons, almost some to that effect. But yes, but we cannot devalue the importance of Joe Jackson on his sons, on his boys there, that made up the Jackson 5. It was Joe with his sheer grit and will that got his sons their first recording contract with Steeltown Records, a local record company Steeltown Records, where they released their first single, Big Boy, in 1967, and it became a local hit. But Joe also, the ambition was just burning in Joe, and he wanted that fame. Joe wanted that fame probably more than his sons did. But he ended up eventually getting them an audition with Motown Records, which was a big thing, real big thing back then. Motown Records was a real big deal back then. Ended up getting them an audition and ended up getting them signed to Motown in 1968. Joe at this time kept a real tight reins on his boys. He really protected them through this whole deal. He was very protective of his boys. He attended every recording session that the boys had with Motown, each and every one of them. He was at each and every one of their performances in the early days as the Jackson 5, and he was there. Joe Jackson was very much a presence with his boys there, and he was very, like I said, he was very protective of them as well. So, yeah, protective as he should be as their dad. Even though they were entering, they were finna enter the big limelight of Hollywood, he was still there. He wasn't just a Hollywood dad. He was just a strict dad that kept tight reins on his sons, because he knew they could deviate into other things that Hollywood offers, and Joe wasn't having that too much. From the success that Joe molded his sons to be, the whole family moved to California, in Encino, to this more spacious house here in 1971, as I said. So the success had produced some benefits as far as a better, bigger, more spacious house, as you see. And Joe had a big part in as I said, he has a big part in his son's success. He molded his sons as the Jackson 5. He really gave them a lot of what they needed to be successful in the entertainment business. He nurtured their talent, so to speak, big time. So yeah, fruits of their labor. Some of the earliest fruits of their labor. The spacious house here. That by the way, I think the Jackson family still owns this. The Jackson family home. They still own this, as far as I know. They still own this house on Havenshurst Drive to this present day. With his son's complaints of not being able to do their own stuff or write their own stuff or, produce their own stuff on Motown, and with Joe's own dissatisfaction with the Motown owner Berry Gordy, Joe ended up striking a deal for his sons with another record label, CBS Epic Records, in 1976. So they left Motown in 1976 and signed with CBS Epic Records in 1976. Joe got him, that deal with Epic CBS, where they promised them they would allow them to be able to write and produce their own material. Interesting footnote here. Jermaine, who was a prominent member of the Jackson... Excuse me for that technical difficulty there, but let me continue. Interesting footnote. Jermaine, who was a integral part of the Jackson 5 when they were at Motown, decided to stay at Motown when his brothers went to CBS Epic Records. He wanted to stay there. He actually at that time had got married to the Berry Gordy's daughter at that time. So he took he stayed. Basically, he took the side with his wife. So he stayed at Motown. Jermaine stayed at Motown while his other brothers went to Epic CBS Records. And they included their youngest brother, Randy, into the group officially. And became the Jacksons, because they couldn't use the Jackson 5 name at Epic CBS Records because Motown owned the name the Jackson 5. So that's why they changed their group name to the Jacksons. When Michael became 21 in 1979, he fired Joe as his manager, and as Michael was taking on his adult solo career was beginning to take off, he fired Joe at the age of Michael was 21 at this time when he fired Joe. So yeah. And consequently, his brothers followed suit in 1983, and they fired Joe as their manager in 1983, about 4 years later. In 1991, LaToya Jackson dropped her book, Growing Up in the Jackson Family, where, amongst other things, she accused her daddy, Joe, of physical and emotional abuse. She said, of course, he wouldn't allow them to call him dad. They could call him Joseph. He wanted them to call him Joseph. He wanted his own kids to call him Joseph and stuff of those likes. But the main thing was the emotional and physical abuse. She made claims against Joe. And that was in 1991, her 1991 book. Interestingly, though, in her 1991 book, LaToya never mentioned anything about sexual abuse from Daddy Joe, which she would later claim. She didn't mention anything about sexual abuse by Joe in this book here, but a few years later, she would bring sexual abuse into the equation. Most people were skeptical of LaToya's claims of physical and mental and emotional abuse that she wrote about in her 1991 book until 2 years later, when her brother Michael in 1993 in the famous Oprah interview kind of corroborated what she said about that in terms of his physical and mental abuse. He stated, which seemed to validate LaToya's claims, that their dad wouldn't allow them to call him dad. He wanted them to call him Joseph. He backed up the physical abuse claims, claiming that him and all of his brothers, they were scared of Daddy Joe because, the abuse that he laid down on them. They were scared of him even into adulthood. And he kind of corroborated and validated LaToya's claims on emotional and physical abuse by Daddy Joe. In that interview. But the thing that a lot of people don't report about what he said in that interview, he said he is forgiving him and he does love him. He loved him and he is forgiving him. And that seemed to be looked over as far as what was said in this interview by Michael. And he also said he wished that he knew his father better. He wished his father was more like, he kind of made the correlation between his father and his mother. He says mother is a wonderful, amazing person. He wished he knew his father like he knows his mother. And I found that kind of odd because, I found that kind of odd because the thing is, women tend to be more nurturing than us men. Most of us men are not nurturers like in a similar way that a woman would be. And that's just the way that it is. That's not the role that we take. Our role is the disciplinarian, the person of structure, and this and that. We are the strength. We are the head. We are the teachers. This is what we generally do as men. So, I thought that correlation between his mother and his father was a little bit misguided. But yeah. But I kind of understood what he was saying about he wish he knew his father better. I kind of understood the grand gist of what he was attempting to convey. But he, like I said, the main points, he did validate LaToya's claims about physical abuse and somewhat emotional and mental abuse. He did kind of corroborate that. But at the same time, the things that wasn't reported is that he said he's forgiven him for it, and he loves his father, and he blatantly said that I love him and I'm forgiving him. So that's big. That's showing that he actually had genuine love for his father, despite his father maybe having, flaws, which, as I stated earlier, all of us humans have flaws. We may not have the same flaws as Joe had, but we still have flaws. So we're not unflawed individuals. So I wish these all you moral Highlander people just come down to earth. You need to take it down a couple of levels. But we continue. For all Michael's claims of the feelings of want to throw up or regurgitate anytime his father was around, he always gave his father respect. All the time, over the many years, he always gave his father respect. He always shouted out his father and gave him major props for being instrumental in his success. So that can't be denied and overlooked. So he understood, in my opinion, the importance of Joe in his life and in his career. From the earliest times when he was no longer under the reins of Joe being his manager in 1979, he always gave props to his dad, Joe Jackson. He would thank God first. This started in 79 to 80. He would thank God first, and then he would thank his mother and father, Joseph and Catherine Jackson, And he began that in 1979 when he first became a solo adult music artist at 21, and he had just fired his manager, but he still was giving him props for his career. Speaks volumes in my opinion. But yeah. Even in 2005, when Michael was fighting for his livelihood against bogus allegations in a criminal prosecution in California, look who he had by his side. None other than his dad, Joe Jackson, was right there at his son's side, and Michael had him there. And if Michael didn't want him there, Joe wouldn't have been there, period. So Michael always showed respect to his dad. No matter his dad's flaws, Michael showed respect to his dad. He showed respect to his dad, Joe Jackson, and that cannot be denied. He loved his dad, and his dad loved him, even though he may have had a problem showing it all the time, but he loved his sons, and he was protective of his sons. So he was protective of his family. He was protective of his kids in general. So shout out to Joe Jackson. Much props to Joe Jackson as well. For the record, after Michael came out and claimed abuse from their dad in 1983, first came out with the claims of abuse from their dad, Joe. His brothers came out and they kind of defended his position about abuse from their dad. They kind of did, kind of didn't. They admitted that their dad was strict and he was hard on them. But they just stopped short of calling it abuse. They called it more discipline, and their father was hard and he was strict. And they kind of justified it, his strict disciplinarian actions as keeping them in line. None of them never been to prison, and none of them didn't use drugs, and they wasn't in a gang, and basically he kept them straight. So ultimately it had a positive influence on them. Basically they were trying to, they justified it, and they put it in an order of just strict disciplinarian, a strict disciplinarian. That's what their father was, and he just So basically, they put it in the context of what Joe and his wife Catherine was at the time, saying that it was just punishment and it was just whoopings, and it wasn't to the level of being abuse. So basically, they were on around the same lines, but they was basically saying that their dad was hard. So they was giving a little bit to both sides. Michael's side about abuse and their parents' side that it was whoopings, that whoopings of discipline, basically basic whoopings of discipline, basically. So back to LaToya. Although she didn't mention anything about sexual abuse from her dad Joe in her 1991 book, in 1993 she first made her claims about sexual abuse from Daddy Joe when she was a child. And it was just shocking to everybody, She made these claims and basically was saying that her mother was she condoned this behavior from Joe, having sex with her as a child. And basically watched, without doing anything, watched Joe come at night, leave her bed, and come into LaToya's bed to have sex with her as a child. These were the claims that LaToya was making in 1993. And explosive claims is that. So yeah. LaToya also hinted that Joe may have did similar or same things to her older sister, Rebe. And also kind of slyly hinted that he may have done the same thing to her baby sister, Janet, as well. But she was saying she don't know. She was more confident, or more, how can I put it? She was more skeptical that it happened to her older sister Rebe than she was about it happening to her baby sister Janet. But both of their names, she basically kind of implied that Joe probably had sexually abused them as children too. Both Rebe and Janet both vehemently denied being sexually abused by Joe as children. They both vehemently denied being abused by Joe. For her part, Janet has never claimed any physical abuse upon her from Joe. She did piggyback on Michael and the brothers and her brothers and LaToya's claims of Joe not allowing his kids to call him dad and wanted him to call him Joseph. So she did claim that. She claimed that with the rest of them. So she did back that claim up about him having them call him Joseph. And so, but another thing that Janet said, she said she wished that she had a closer relationship with her dad. And that's something that Michael has said before as well. He has stated that as well. It seemed like Joe wasn't that type of, sentimental, caring, and showing love type of man. Like he was a hardened type of man. That's what it seemed like to me from, that's what I get and that's what I gather. But Janet had mentioned how she wished she had a father-daughter type of bond, like she seen other people have that she knew with their father or something like that. She said she longed for that type of relationship with him, with Joe, that she never really had. But yeah, and interesting, Joe was Janet's manager too. He was her manager, so they did have a manager-artist relationship. So as Janet's manager, Joe was instrumental in getting Janet her first record deal with A&M Records and her first album released, her self-titled first album, Janet Jackson, in 1982. After that first album, however, in 1982, Janet went on to fire her manager, father, Joe Jackson. LaToya, for her part, recanted a lot of things that she wrote in her 1991 book, and also the things that she said in various interviews around that time, 1991, the early 1990s. She recanted a lot in her second book, in her interviews promoting that book that came out in like 2011. So, she blamed a lot of what she was saying around that time on the abuse and the controlling the nature of her husband, a man named Jack Gordon. Jack Gordon was a sleazy guy who was first introduced to LaToya by her father, Joe. And he eventually became a co-manager of LaToya's career with Joe in the mid-1980s. Eventually though, Joe became not LaToya's manager, and Jack Gordon became full manager and full control of her career, full control over LaToya's career. He eventually married her in LaToya and Jack Gordon eventually got married in 1989 under the guise where Jack had told LaToya that he was trying to protect her from her family who was trying to kidnap her. So he was showing manipulative ways even early on in their marriage in 1989. And mind you, Jack was 20 plus years older than LaToya, so he had an upper hand on her as far as mentality and probably experience and probably just everything. He just had an upper hand on LaToya, so you got to keep that in mind. Me personally, I believe LaToya's claims about a lot of the claims that she was making in the early 1990s came from being controlled by Jack Gordon. He was an abuser of her. It was reported and documented his abuse of her. There was pictures of LaToya as well with black eyes and bruises that he allegedly gave her in domestic situations. So it was reported and documented to the police. Police had to be called to their residency several times. So it's documented that he was abusing her. So I believe her claims that he was forcing her to do certain things, like when she did Playboy magazine and stuff like that, to get attention. I think to kind of boost her career or boost attention, because remember, he's a manager. He was a manager by craft, so he was trying to get her out there in the get the spotlight on her, get some attention. And I believe that was one of the ways that he used to get attention for her, to make these outrageous claims or make outrageous claims or get yourself out in the media in front of the camera and all that stuff. So yeah, so I believe when she was in that marriage with Jack, he made her and forced her to make certain claims. I could see that he came off as a very, very sleazy guy. Like I said, him and LaToya got married in 1989. They were married and got a divorce in 1997 when LaToya just had enough of his abuse and everything. And in 1997, she took notice to reconnect with her family as well. So good for LaToya. That was one of the best moves, in my opinion, that she made. So. One claim that LaToya never fully recanted, though, was the child sexual abuse by her father, Joe. And a lot of people went and ran with this and making it seem like it was something, since she didn't fully recant this story, it must have been true. But I take another angle on this. I believe, because what else she said in the interview, when she was confronted in the interview with her claims that she had made in the early 1990s about her father sexually abusing her as a child, although she didn't recant that story in the interview, she talked about how great her father was and how good a heart he was and good-hearted he was. So she was avoiding the question kind of sort of. But she also was raising and promoting her mother as well. Now, in her claims about child sexual abuse, she claimed that her mother was complicit while she was being sexually abused by her father. So that would make her mother and her father, Joe, disgusting people. So while you're praising your mother, who you said that was complicit while you was getting sexually abused as a child, you're avoiding the question about your father sexually abusing you as a child, which you brought up in the early 1990s. It only gave me one. This is what I thought about. This is my opinion on it. I think that was something that wasn't true as well. I don't think her father sexually abused her as a child. I think that was a claim that was made for attention, as most of her stuff that she claimed was made, from controlling husband at the time, Jack Gordon. But yeah, because my thing is, she couldn't admit in my opinion, she could not admit that wasn't true, because that's playing with something that's real serious. There's actual child sexual abuse victims. There's actually sexual abuse victims out there, a lot of them, especially child sexual abuse victims. And to play that role, to be one of them, and that wasn't actually true, she would have got a lot of pushback on that, a lot of negative pushback, and I think she understood that. So for her to answer that question or to recant that would have brought a lot of negative energy her way for playing with the ideal of sexual abuse, which is no joke. So that's why I believe she couldn't fully recant that, because that would have been horrendous for her. Worse than her horrendous. That would have been a terrible nightmare. So she couldn't totally fully recant that, because there was no justification for her using something serious like that. You got many real victims of actual sexual abuse out there, and that, so she could not justify using that. She couldn't recant that. She couldn't, in my opinion, she couldn't fully recant that claim. She just couldn't. So that's my thing on that. To sum this whole thing up, Joseph Jackson, he was a man. He was human, and he was a man. Did he probably go too far in his disciplinarianness? Yes. He probably was a strong disciplinarian. He probably, kind of took it maybe too far sometimes in his strictness or something, and he probably came off as strong. I could see him coming off as strong, but ultimately it was good for his family. He had 6 boys. He had 9 kids, 6 boys, and none of them was ever in prison. None of them was ever really in drugs or in trouble or anything. So he really laid the groundwork for them to be successful in life. And we got to give him props for that. I think, a lot of people like to label Joseph Jackson as a devil or something like that. And I dispute that. I don't think he was a devil. He was the perfect guy or the perfect man? No, by no means. But none of us are perfect. So yeah, he had his faults. He was a philanderer. He went out. He had women on the side. He did that. He cheated. He had a strong fist. He probably, disciplined too hard. He probably did that. But, it's just, those are human flaws. And but I don't think very few people need to be called the devil, or they like a devil. This man, he was a man. He was human, and he was a man. And he probably was not raised in a soft way or anything. He probably was raised hard from his parents. We don't know how he was raised, how his coming up was. So he probably raised and parented the way that he was raised and parented. So that's the only thing that he knew, and the only way he knew. So, I don't knock the man, because whatever he did, it was successful. The Jacksons wouldn't have been successful without him, Michael included. None of the Jacksons would have been as successful as they were. He was the driving force, in my opinion, behind all of their success. He was the biggest driving force, the biggest driving early force in all of their careers. So I just want to give praise to this man. I'm tired of people jumping on his name, dogging his name. This man deserves props. Joseph Jackson, even though he's no longer with us, he unfortunately passed away on June the 27th, 2018, where he will join his son, Michael, who passed on June 25th, 2009. And he also is going to be joined by his second oldest son, Tito Jackson, who passed away recently. So, so I just want to give praise to Joseph Jackson, and thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And may you continue to rest in peace, knowing that you done well. Even with all your flaws and everything, you done well, sir. And thank you so much. And continue to rest in peace. I'm going to end the video right here. Please feel free to like, share, and comment on this video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. After subscribing, please hit that little notification bell so you can be notified of any new uploads. And I thank you all for your support. I appreciate it. If you have any suggestions for any upcoming videos from me, or you want me to do on a subject or a person, email me at provocateurjoseph@gmail.com. And with that, I'm out. Peace. One love.